quickly introduce our panelists to begin with. We have, all the way down at the end, Silvia Moreno-Garcia is the author of Silver Nitrate, which is newly on sale this week, The Daughter of Dr. Moreau, which was just nominated for a Hugo Award this year, Velvet Was the Night, Mexican Gothic, Gods of Jade and Shadow, and many other books. She has won the Locus and British Fantasy Awards for her work as a novelist and the World Fantasy Award as an editor. Next, we have Genevieve Gornichek, who earned her degree in history from the Ohio State University, but she got as close to majoring in Vikings as she possibly could, and her study of Norse myths and Icelandic sagas became her writing inspiration. Her national best-selling debut novel, The Witch's Heart, has been translated into more than 10 languages. Her next novel, The Weaver and the Witch Queen, releases on July 25th, which is Tuesday. Lauren J.A. Baer was born in Boston and raised in Long Beach. After studying English at UCLA and education at LMU, she taught middle school humanities for over a decade and survived. She is a teaching fellow for the Holocaust Center for Humanity and lives in Seattle with her husband and 3 young children. Her debut novel, Medusa Sisters, releases in August. Emily Skrutsky is 6 feet tall. She lives and works in Los Angeles. Skrutsky is the author of Vows of Empire, Oaths of Legacy, Bonds of Brass, Hull Metal Girls, The Abyss Surrounds Us, The Edge of the Abyss, and the forthcoming novel, The Salvation Gambit. And last but certainly not least, we have Evelyn Skye, who is the New York Times bestselling author of 8 novels, including The Crown's Game. A graduate of Stanford University and Harvard Law School, Skye lives in the San Francisco Bay Area with her husband and daughter. Okay, let's get started. So, I want to hear a little bit from each of you. Quick little icebreaker moment. If you could pair one of your books with a food or a drink, which would it be? And tell us why. Evelyn is excited, so we're going to start with her.
I'm all about food. Every single one of my books has food in it. So my next book, The 100 Loves of Juliet, comes out on August 1st, and it is a reincarnation romantasy, I guess, about Romeo and Juliet. If Romeo never died, but Juliet did, and she's reincarnated over and over, and in every lifetime he finds her, they fall in love, and then he has to watch her die again. But then in modern day, she refuses to believe in their tragedy. So you follow them across history, through centuries, across continents, and then you also get to see them here in modern day. And the food is Nutella pastries, because it's Juliet's favorite food in every lifetime, and Romeo always makes them for her from scratch. And then in the in-between time when he's not with her reincarnation, he has one every morning for breakfast so he can still be with her.
I don't know how to follow that. The Salvation Gambit is a more like dystopian sci-fi. It takes place on this warship that has styled itself into a penal colony. And I think the only food that is really specific to the book is that they do pass through a potato farm at one point, so I'm going to say French fries.
Yeah. All right, Medusa Sisters is set in the ancient world of Greece, so I clearly have to go with a Greek menu here. Maybe some dolmas, and then ouzo on ice. You're going to need it.
So The Weaver and the Witch Queen is set in Viking Age Norway, and as someone who does Viking Age living history, I have to say that we eat a lot of stew, so it would definitely be stew. Any kind of stew. Just name the stew. It just can't have potatoes in it because they didn't have potatoes. I'm so sorry.
Silver Nitrate, which is out this week, is a supernatural suspense novel set in 1993 Mexico City about 2 best friends who work in the film industry and stumble upon a movie that might be cursed. So the food would be popcorn.
Yes.
If you weren't hungry before, you're hungry now. So let's jump right in. What is the best piece of writing advice you've ever gotten, and how has it informed your writing since then?
Okay, I will start. All right, I have a book recommendation for you, so if you're taking notes, it's called Deep Work by Cal Newport, and it's not specific about writing, but it is about how to focus your mind in a very distracted world, and it completely changed my career because our brains are trained now to jump on social media or to check the news. Like anytime you get uncomfortable in your writing and you can't sit there anymore and sit in your creativity and work through that uncomfortableness. So once I adopted the techniques in deep work, I, in the last 360-ish days, have published 4 books with all big 5 publishers, just because I could suddenly be that productive when I actually focused.
I'll go. So Nigma Matas, who is a fellow writer, said, just write a few pages a day. If you can't write a few pages a day, write a page. If you can't write a page, write 100 words. If you can't write 100 words, write a sentence. If you write a bunch of pages, you may take the next day or 2 off.
I recently was talking with a really phenomenal speculative fiction writer, Marie-Helene Bertino, and she'd said to me, think about how your work answers the Passover question, which for those of you who've ever been to Seder is, why is this night unlike any other night? And you apply that question or that way of thinking into every scene, every character, every plot twist that you put into your writing, and you try to think about how you make it different, right? And I think about this a lot now as I'm constructing what I'm going to work on for the day. Like, where in here do I answer the Passover question? So I would pass that on.
I would say for me, the best advice that I ever got was to write what is in your heart and write for you and not for anybody else, not for the market, just because everything is always changing, and writing, like the act itself, drafting, is such a solitary act that sometimes you are your only fan and you have to believe that you can keep going. So that is my advice.
Something that's really informed my process recently is embracing iteration, which is maybe a little bit more technical, but basically if you set up the expectation that you are going to write perfectly from the get-go, you're already setting yourself up to fail. You have to write the bad version first. Margaret Owen has a really good blog post on iterative drafting, kind of outlining a stage, or the stages that she uses if anybody wants a really good resource for that. But like with the Salvation Gambit, I actually wrote a bad version of the book first. I just wrote the whole thing, printed it out, put it like in a little spiral bound thing, and that became the version that I had to start from. And then I could go back and write the good version.
Okay, so we have our best writing advice, and now I want to flip it a little bit. What's the worst writing advice? You all knew, you saw it coming. The worst writing advice you've ever received, and has that informed your writing in any way?
I mean, I think the worst advice is to write every day, because I think you do need to take pauses sometimes. You have to refill your creative well. So I just talked about publishing 4 books in like really a year, technically less than a year. And I'm going to take a sabbatical now because I need to live some real life before I can write something new that has something interesting to say for all of my readers. And so my characters can actually be, someone different than everyone I've written in the past in the last year. So I don't believe in write every day. I do believe in discipline, like wanting it and then setting a schedule for yourself, but being kind to yourself if you just need a break.
I might say something controversial. The worst writing advice I ever received was "said is dead." Said is dead. I think that "said" is one of those dialogue tags that just kind of like, it's supposed to kind of blend in. Like, you're not really supposed to notice it. The dialogue's supposed to do the heavy lifting for you. You're supposed to know the characters well enough that like your readers will take away the meaning and their tone from what they're saying. So I'm not saying that it should always be said, but like you don't have to actively avoid using "said."
I don't know that I have anything very specific, but I think that there's a lot of bad writing advice surrounding the practice of NaNoWriMo and of smashing a draft out as fast as possible. I think that we do not live in the kind of world where that is sustainable or advisable. And sure, it's a fun thing to do every now and again, but like Evelyn said, we really need to refill the creative well. And I personally have always written my best when I'm writing really slow, like 300 words a day maximum, and just taking the time to think as I go along, because writing really fast and not taking the time to think, that's how you end up with the bad version that gets exercised into the spiral notebook forever.
I think mine was don't do a prologue. That prologues are corny, don't do it, avoid it. I love my prologue, and I stand by my prologue because in Medusa's Sisters, people are going into this book, and what they know about Medusa is that she gets her head cut off. So in my prologue, I cut her head off, and that was super intentional because I want my reader to be thrown off guard. Like, if her losing her head is not the climax, then what else is coming for these ladies, right? So, yeah, I stand by my prologue. And if you believe in your prologue, I believe in you as well.
And having read an arc of your book, it's kind of like record scratch. Like, I bet you're wondering how we got here. Let's back it up a little bit.
Should I? Yeah, I don't know. Do you want me to get serious or not? Or do you want me to keep it light? I'm being
As
honest
serious
here.
as you'd like.
Okay. I was told not to write about Mexico and to change my name.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So multiple times, several editors. So. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I've written 9 novels, so I didn't care what they said. Well, I started in a very small way, and I started in indie circles, and so I grew my way into. It was not a big advance and a big backup behind me. It was like slowly growing an audience. That is a path that is becoming less and less common, unfortunately. So there's not a lot of support for mid-listers anymore, but it's the way I came to it by believing that that could work, right? And so I couldn't change the industry. I could only do what I could do. But eventually I ended up, meeting also other writers of color and things like that. But when I started out, I remember in 2006 writing short stories. I knew all the writers of color because there were like 6 of us and we all knew each other, kind of, across different parts of the world, kind of working in the same milieu that were emerging at that time. There had been people before and there were people after, but more or less as the same age. We all knew kind of each other. So it was very lonely for a little while, and then it just started changing. But we just, we kept doing it, and some of us are still around, so it kind of works to be steady. I guess that's the only thing. It's, my friend Labi says that it's a Darwinian race because most people really don't have, maybe you have only 1 book in you or 2, not really like multiple books in you. So once you have, if you get to that point where you're on the 5th book, you're probably going to kind of survive for a little while longer. But it's always a very fleeting touch and go kind of situation, writing. So, yeah.
We'll have time for more audience questions at the end as well. So feels like there's a lot of rules out there for writers, rules that you should be listening to, rules that you shouldn't be listening to. Are there any rules that you have heard that you absolutely love to break? Specifically rules that you love to break? There's the classic don't end a sentence with a preposition, but also, use less adverbs, don't use said, all of that stuff.
I was going to say adverbs. I love adverbs.
I like starting my sentences with and or but, and I like run-ons. They sound really musical if you do it correctly and you do series of dependent clauses. I like them.
My editor would probably back me up on this. I really like an M dash.
Yes, me too.
Yeah.
You can pry my M dashes out of my cold, dead hands.
I'm thinking so hard.
I believe in you. I believe in you too.
No, nothing in particular. I like to see what other people do, what other people that are very different from me do in terms of genre and writing, just out of curiosity. And but it's not because I want to go against them, if that makes any sense. I just want to see what they can do in their milieu. It's like if you're a painter, you want to see what a sculptor does.
Yeah, I guess I'm having trouble thinking of things that are hard and fast rules because to me, there are standards and there's basically what works and what doesn't work. It's probably a rule because it trips up a reader when they get to it. It's like ending a sentence with a preposition, for example. So if it's clear and it works, then that works. And why is it a rule in the first place?
I'm going to go back to a little bit to what Silvia was just saying about reading other authors' work. There a lot of advice, I think, out there about reading everything that you can get your hands on to learn from other authors. Are there any particular authors that you've read that you've learned a lot from, and what have you learned from them?
Okay, so for me, before I start writing, I always reread the first chapter of a Maggie Stiefvater book because she's really masterful at creating ambiance. So her settings basically become characters in the book. So if you like books with ambiance, definitely check out Maggie Stiefvater. And just kind of like to seg from that too, I also wanted to talk about reading other people's work to find your voice, because I think finding voice is a really hard thing to do when you're getting started. And my best advice is write like you talk. But maybe that's not the voice you want your character to have. And I think there's a lot of people out there who say don't copy somebody else's voice. But I actually think that when you're starting out, that's not a bad thing to do. Just knowing that that's not going to be your final voice. But I think it's actually kind of good to try on other voices and read other authors to get that range. And then you will eventually figure out where you sit.
Yeah, for inspiration, I think make friends with poets. Honestly, I take a lot of classes at Hugo House in Seattle, and I'm always what's the Adam Sandler movie where he's like the one who doesn't fit, the one where he's older? Yes, right? I'm like the one who doesn't fit in the class and just like staring at everybody. But I take classes with poets because the way that poets can employ brevity and clarity and yet excess on the line level is so inspiring to me, and I think it makes my writing more lyrical the more I hang out with poets. And Anne Carson, her translations of ancient Greek source material are just mind-blowing. They're so brilliant, and they make these classical texts feel super modern. So I think she's a go-to for me.
I would like to read short story anthologies, even though I can't write short stories, just because when you're composing short fiction, like every word has to count. And when you're writing a novel, like I tend to go on and on and on and then have to like shave things down. So like just seeing like how concisely and kind of like what you said about poetry, like just like how things are worded in a specific way, like is really inspiring to me when it's shorter.
Yeah, I like to take just authors that I admire and do a deep dive, an actual kind of academic reading of a text from time to time. So like I'll be setting out to write kind of more of a sci-fi thriller, and I'll be like, okay, I'm gonna sit down with Ancillary Justice and just go through and see why this works, how this all builds. I've already read the book, so I can see where the plot twists are being hinted at and kind of build a structure for the story that you don't necessarily get as a casual reader. I find that really helpful.
I'm not sure how to answer it. I guess I really like getting involved in a lot of stuff that is in translation. And I've been very interested in Korean literature lately and Korean crime fiction. It's just good because it doesn't do necessarily what you would expect in the United States a book would do. And I like a lot of the sense of pacing that I've had with certain books where I think a similar American crime story, it would have been like, this is moving too slow, but apparently that's not a universal dictum in other kinds of books. So I do enjoy going into the translation section and getting some books from there.
In addition to reading other authors' works, do you have other sources that you constantly go back to for writing advice, for writing inspiration, podcasts, blogs? Is it Twitter? Is it Threads? Do you have any advice as far as that goes?
Okay, so 2 more books for you. The first one is called Hooked by Les Edgerton. And it's a pretty old book. I think it's still out there, though. It's all about first sentences, first paragraphs, and first pages. And it is just gold for you to really, well, hook a reader, hook an agent, hook an editor. So I love that one. It's always great to revisit. And then Save the Cat, which lots of people love. You don't have to follow it beat by beat, but it's good to understand pacing just because that's what readers love, and agents and editors. Like, you want to understand how to make them turn pages, how to like set up cliffhangers, that sort of thing, in order to, I don't know, write a book that someone's going to want to represent or buy. And if you're into anything with a love story in it, I like Romancing the Beat. That's also a great plot structure.
I can't remember what the title of this collection is. It has a yellow cover. I can see it in my mind, but like I said, I can't remember the title. But it's a collection of essays by Ursula Le Guin. And her defense of genre fiction and just the articulate way she talks about writing and genre and imagination and her social commentary. I mean, she's another one that I go back to all the time, just to kind of bask in her genius. But read some of her essays on writing. They're really, really beautiful.
An old favorite of mine is Stephen King's On Writing. I see a lot of nods. That's a very good one. I think one of the reasons I like it so much is because he takes the time to go through kind of his evolution as a writer, not just as, you know, the process of learning how to write, but how it worked alongside his life as a working man. I think that's something that gets lost a lot in writing advice, is the reality of most of us aren't doing this full time. And it's great to see the process of building a career from the ground up, and, well, a hell of a career, too.
I have gotten a lot of good writing advice from Twitter, and it's really interesting to like kind of almost crowdsource writing advice, because you read a book and it's like, okay, this is just this one person's opinion on this aspect of writing, but like on social media is good for a lot of things and bad for a lot of things. But when you have like, they'll be like, oh, here is today's take going around on Twitter, this seems very wise, and then the next day somebody will retweet it and be like, actually, and like totally take it down. It's like, whoa. So it's like you can blow your own mind like in real time, just like learning things just by scrolling. I'm not advising doom scrolling though.
I think though also social media is a good place to meet other writers.
Yes.
Explicitly looking for writers who are posting, but also like in your favorite author's comments section, there's often a lot of writers who, are looking for critique partners or advice, and I don't know, I think it'd be a nice way to meet people.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not on Twitter anymore much, but I am a member of Crime Writers of Color, and I've been a member of other writers groups, so surely there's a writers group that might be perhaps your regional writers group or something like that, and sometimes they are useful just to see what everyone else is doing, and they give you advice sometimes in those forums. If you post a question, at least I've seen them go by where somebody posts a question and several people answer. So those can be fun, and there's several, there's SFWA, and I'm sure there's other ones, but yeah. So I'm a member of Crime Writers of Color. That is an association, so if you write crime, noir, that kind of stuff, maybe you can look into it.
So we're giving a lot of advice to the audience members here, but I'd like you to think back to your younger self, perhaps pre your first book being published, perhaps childhood self. What advice would you give that person about writing?
Okay, so I wrote 8 manuscripts that never got published before I actually got my book deal with my 9th book. And so I think I would go back and encourage myself to keep going, because I was ready to quit. And it was because I had friends who said, don't quit, your time is just around the corner. And when I wrote that 9th book, I decided to put everything I wanted in a book and to stop thinking about what I thought editors wanted, what I thought the market wanted. And I thought, I'm going to write about this weird time in history that no one else writes about, and there's going to be a magical duel, and the magic's going to be beautiful. It's fierce, but it's going to be really pretty, and also there's magical food. And somehow people decided that's what they wanted to read, and I think it's because I stopped just overthinking things, and I let my heart guide me. So I would just say keep going. Your time is just around the corner.
Evelyn, I would completely agree with you. And I think the difference between, when people ask, like, what is a writer, who is a writer, I think it's that you keep going. And that's the difference between being an amateur and a professional, is when no matter what you're feeling, no matter what people are saying, you keep going and you have grit, and I believe in you. And your prologues.
I think I would tell my younger self that it's not all or nothing. I think I went through a lot of heartache when I was like a teenager, and I was like, I'm going to be a creative professional. I am going to make a living writing, and that obviously didn't happen. And I got into just a lot of strain over the idea that, you know, I had to somehow make a living doing this. But I think that I never really understood until I got into my life as a working professional that I didn't have to be a creative full-time. I just had to have a balance between something that was going to put food on the table and something that is going to nourish me creatively. And that balance is possible. I think that's what I would tell my younger self, because I didn't believe it at the time.
Yeah, it's, I mean, the thing is, people say writer, and I think they don't have a good idea of what it entails in terms of what it is as a profession. It's really being a full-time freelancer. And so if you imagine being, for example, a full-time freelance graphic designer, you get a better idea of what it is to be a writer. You have to get clients, you have to fulfill a project, you're often juggling different deadlines, different things, and your money is not going to come from one single thing, one single project. And it's not going to come like your dream project. Sometimes you do side things, and so most writers that I know, we make our money from, yes, writing books, but we might do things like public speaking, we might do things like writing for other types of media, such as comic books maybe, or the occasional like short story anthology. We might be doing editing, or even other kinds of kind of side-related industry gigs. And most people don't think that. They think that you get to write one book every 10 years, and it's whatever kind of book you want. And so that's not the reality for most people on the ground. There are a few people who can take the time to write just one magnum opus every 10 or 15 years, and they'll still have that money. But for most people, that's why you see things like, why is a book coming out? Why is it a series? And there's one book 1 year after that, and why is it now in paperback? That kind of stuff. Or why is there suddenly a novella that is kind of like the prequel to the series kind of situation? Is because those are ways for writers to, I mean, they like what they're doing, but they also have to make a certain amount of money. And so if you don't like the idea of that kind of instability, of that kind of freelancing sort of lifestyle, you know, maybe it's not the best for you. But if you can juggle different deadlines, if you can do all these kinds of things and still make at the end of the year a salary, then it's fine. But it's just that reality. When people ask me, what do you do? I say I'm a full-time freelance writer. And I've only been a full-time freelance writer for a year and a bit of change. Before that, I was a full-time science communications professional who wrote in her free time. And it wasn't until I had, what is it now? This is my 9th novel. 9 novels in print with a long enough kind of catalog that I said, okay, I'm going to quit the full-time corporate communications job, and I'm going to be a full-time freelancer. But I still have to pay my rent, and I'm the breadwinner, so there's nobody else who makes sure that all my children get fed and all that kind of stuff. And so it's not as glamorous as some people kind of imagine, but it can be very fun and fulfilling. I mean, it depends. Like, that's the thing. People also think, well, you work from home and you do whatever you want, and that's probably not the reality. If anybody has been working from home, you're not just snacking all day long, as we saw during COVID. So there's a certain amount of, you know, just pounding the pavement and seeing what you can do. And it can be tough, but, you know, some people like it. I like it. I think we all kind of enjoy it, so.
I think I would tell my younger self not only to not give up, because I also had, at the time that The Witch's Heart, that I picked up an agent for my debut novel, or an agent picked me up rather, I had already written 4 books, and I was kind of keeping my debut kind of close to my chest because it was really important to me. I wrote it for NaNoWriMo, actually, the first draft.
Nothing wrong with NaNoWriMo.
It underwent a lot of changes since NaNoWriMo, I will say. But I'm glad now that that was the book that finally got me the offer, because the rest of them are not seeing the light of day. So I would tell myself that everything happens on your own time when it's like supposed to happen for you.
I have a book in the drawer too. And I think it's good to hear that like we all had our journeys to get here. And I think it was Saba Tahir, the author. She always says in interviews, like, if I can do it, you can do it too. And I read that as, you know, an aspiring writer, and it really like hit me in the heart. Like, that really empowered me to keep going, was hearing her say that.
Are there any, speaking of working from home and making your own schedule, are there any writing rituals that you have that you would advise people try out, or pieces of them that you think might work for other people?
I would advise people to never have writing rituals. You need to be nimble. It's true. There's sometimes you are like here, and you have to go back and write in a hotel room, and you can't go and get your special scented candle and your cat. And yeah, so I have heard people that really, I think, are like, I can only write, on Wednesdays when it's raining, and that kind of thing. And yeah, no, I think what you need to learn is how to exercise that muscle, where you're going to be able to work under adverse conditions, whatever they may be, several of them, and it's just a skill. It's like anything else. If you ever worked in like down here in this convention, there's a lot of sound, and it's hard for me to navigate the floor because I'm bumping into people. But I'm sure the people on the sales floor, they were not born being able to block off all the noise and all the distractions. It's just they're used to this, and they're doing their job, they're selling, and they're out there. So it's just a skill. The same thing as with writing. You just learn it, and so I would say don't get too comfy with rituals. I mean, if there's something that you like, it's fine, but don't be super dependent on it so that you cannot function without it.
And I think that it's also super dangerous to compare yourself to other people, because you'll see these people on social media, especially on TikTok, they're like romanticizing. They're like, oh, and I'm gonna get my scented candle, and then I'm gonna get my very specific drink, and then everything is pink, and there's nothing wrong with that. Pink is great, yeah. but you know what I mean. And it's like, yeah, I pack up my laptop and I go to Starbucks. So.
Nothing makes me feel like more of a real writer than being able to jot something down while drunk in the back of an Uber.
Or in your notes app.
Yeah,
I just had a really good idea for a line.
Yeah. I think this is good.
Yep.
Yeah. Write drunk, get it sober.
Yeah, and then you look at it later, you're like, where was this supposed to go?
I'm good. No, I can't follow up with that.
I do have a hack that it doesn't work every time, but it does do gangbusters when it does, which is I will prepare myself a little snack, and then if I write 100 words, I get to eat one little chip.
That doesn't work on me. I just eat the whole snack. I don't have the self-control, but I think that's great for people who do.
That's what I'm saying. It doesn't work every time, but when it works.
We love a reward system. It works well. Okay, we're going to do one rapid-fire question down the line, and then I'll open it up for questions from the audience. We're all writers and readers here, so favorite childhood book? Ready, set, go.
I don't remember my childhood.
Favorite book in general?
I like The Little Prince.
Little.
Yeah.
My Side of the Mountain by Jean Craig George.
Dealing with Dragons by Patricia C. Reed.
I loved me some Artemis Fowl as a child.
Tales of Mystery and Imagination, Poe.
Okay, we'll open it up to audience questions. Right here.
How many of you have cats, and how has your cat helped you in the brain?
2, and they have not.
I have no cat.
Dog person.
Dog, yeah.
So there's a lot of advice for authors
authors who are querying like oceans of advice. I found that once you get past that point, it kind of dries up. So what is your advice for writers who are getting ready to go out on submission for the first time, logistically, psychologically, anything that could be helpful?
Anybody else?
I think work on your next thing
Yeah.
so that you can take your mind off of it and just trust your agent to handle the submission process and check in every so often, but work on the next thing because otherwise you'll make yourself like just completely mad.
Whatever you can do to stop caring.
Yes.
How much research is too much research?
The limit does not exist.
Yeah. Well, some people don't want to write a book. They just want to become immersed in the research. And it's okay if that's what you write, if you're ready to admit it to yourself, instead of flagellating yourself. But if you're not going to use it for something, yeah, there is a point at which you have to stop and you have to do it. So I have a friend who has been researching something for like 6 or 7 years, and yeah, that's the thing. It has become obvious that she does not intend to write anything. She just, likes the world building aspect of it, but she doesn't want to sit down and do it. But I call it caterpillaring. There's a point where the caterpillar is like full and needs to become a butterfly, and only you can know it. But yeah, I would say if it's been years, that's the point where you really have to have that serious conversation with yourself of, are you more in love with the subject matter than with the actual act of making it into a book or a story?
And that's when it's really helpful too to have a beta reader who can be honest with you, because when you have done all this research and you're so proud of it and you put so much work into it, you want to include as much as possible in your book, but then you might be sacrificing character or plot or pacing. And it hurts to cut those facts out that you collected, but you need that tough love person to remind you.
At one point, I had done like hours and hours of research on Viking Age door hinges, and there was like 3 paragraphs about these door hinges in The Witch's Heart. And like on one of the past pages, I was like just reading through the whole book out loud, and I got to that part, and I was like, this is boring. And then I just cut those paragraphs. I'm like, okay. So yeah, like you said, there's a point where like you have to just like get out of your own head and stop researching and just tell the story that you want to tell.
And have a document where you can put all those things you cut so that they don't just disappear. Like they're there somewhere, and maybe one day you're really going to need to write about
Door
Viking
hinges.
and you are G2G, you know?
I'm a traditionally published picture book author, and I'm trying to now start writing novels. And of course, it's a completely different art form. Is it a reasonable approach to write short stories as a way to learn how to write in longer form as sort of a stepping stone to writing novels? Would you say don't just write the novel and don't even?
Yeah, I would say write the novel because I think, was it Silvia or Emily, I forgot who said that short stories are just completely different structured, or
Yeah, it was me.
it was Genevieve, I'm sorry. It was one of these very smart people here. I would say just start writing the novel and learn that structure.
And it also depends on the story you want to tell too. Like sometimes you sit down to write something intending for it to be a short story, and you're like, oh, this is going to be really long. So it's all about the story that you want to tell and what form best suits it.
So I think one of you talked about having a profession which is paid bills and one to write. How do you draw the balance between the two? Find that in writing or tired after a long day of that job which is paid bills.
That's where going small and slow helps. Because the bills are not getting paid by the writing is not as important as the job that pays the bills. So the writing can go at maybe, a page a day. And if I really, sit down and focus, that can happen in 15 minutes. So as long as I'm getting something down every day, I actually keep a spreadsheet while I'm drafting, and I just put my word count in for the day. And I feel really bad if I see a 0 on that spreadsheet. So that's my motivation to keep on trucking, even if it's like 100, even if it's like 50, even if it's one sentence, just getting a little number in every day adds up over time.
I mean, it's good to put it away. It's actually good because if it's too fresh, sometimes you ignore like your mistakes. And this goes for academic papers too. There's a spelling mistake and you don't notice it because you've been going over the page so many times. So sometimes if you forget about it and you come back to it a couple of months later, it can seem like somebody else wrote it, which is the best thing to do because that way you can be more objective about it. When you go do that thing where you're like, suddenly there's 3 paragraphs about door hinges and this is really boring, that's the best kind of mindset that you can have because that's when you build a certain amount of distance from it. So it's not bad to put it away for a little while. It's bad to put it away forever if your desire is to publish. That's the other thing is like you have to decide like, do you really want your writing to be seen by other people? Some people just want to write for themselves, which is perfectly fine. But if you do want somebody else to see it, you're going to have to look at it critically at a certain point in time. So whether that's in 2 weeks or 2 months down the line, just make a little note in your calendar that you're going to look at some pages in 2 months and then look at it, as objectively as possible and with as much distance as you can.
Jen and I were talking about this morning, and I had heard from another writer friend, they call it the proving drawer, like for Great British Baking fans. And you put your manuscript in there when it's fresh. It works exactly with what you were saying. And you let it rise, and then you go back and look at it. So yeah, put it in the proving drawer, and then make delicious novel bread.
And then this is just like a technical tip. Once you get to that point, I like to just print out the manuscript, or you can send it to your Kindle or other e-reader, and that way it reads more like a book, and it helps me distance myself as well. But I like printing it because then I can write little critical comments to myself, and I don't get lazy about fixing it, because if I'm like reading on my computer screen, I'll think, oh yeah, that's pretty good, and because I just want to move on, you know? But if I make the notes just on a piece of paper, and I think, okay, future Evelyn will deal with this and fix it in a good way later, then I can't cheat and just tell myself, yeah, it's good enough, or like this like half sentence fixes everything.
I also change the font when I print it out because that like further makes me feel like somebody else wrote it. I'm a 12-point Times New Roman girly, so I change it to like Garamond, and then I'm like, who wrote this? I've never met her.
What kind of maniac prints in Garamond?
So I don't know if I'm alone in this, but when I get to writing, I just continue to write because the passion gets stronger the more I write. And I'll write maybe 30 pages a day. And I did that for a solid 2 years. I'm a self-published short story author. But ever since I took 1 day of break, now whenever I sit at my computer, I just immediately get exhausted and I go into burnout, and I've been in burnout for what feels like over a year. How would you guys combat that? Like, have you guys dealt with burnout and how do you deal with it?
I've been in burnout for the past like 6 months, ever since I turned in the final draft of The Weaver and the Witch Queen. Just be kind to yourself. Just like give yourself time. I've heard that it takes like 2 years to recover from burnout, which is like horrifying. So I try not to think about that. So just be nice to yourself. Give yourself time to heal.
Stories all day long. The minute I sit down to try and write it, it's like,
Yeah, no, I know the feel. I believe in you. Anybody else have like actual advice?
Write what you want to write. You know, I think as a novelist, and I don't know short story very well, but there are some days where it feels like Everest to sit down at the computer, and I know what I should write next chronologically, but if I don't want to, I just skip ahead and write something that's more appealing to me at the time, and then go back.
I'm jealous.
There's this website called AO3,
Yes.
and you will never find me on there.
Ever.
But again, like, it's the writing for pleasure, right? It's finding something fun to play with, finding a way that you can be more playful with it, and then you can get back to serious writing that pays the bills.
Okay, I think we have time for one more. All the way back.
I've just finished my first draft of my first novel. I'm working on the second draft. And the first draft had a really nice, smooth flow. The second one, I'm moving around sentences and pages and entire chapters. And it feels like Frankenstein's monster. All I see are the stitches, and it's causing a lot of blockage.
I would say when you're done, let it proof. Like, seriously, like, because I also, like, have Frankensteined, like, 4 drafts of my most recent novel, and the only thing that worked was just to let it kind of, like, marinate for a little bit. And then when you go back to it with fresh eyes, you kind of see where the stitches are, and you're like, okay, how can I smooth this out?
I don't know if this is also not already part of your process, but don't copy paste. Right, retype everything. Just you have to go through the motion of retyping, and as you write, that thought process starts to flow, and you smooth over those stitches a little bit better.
That is, yeah.
Moving stuff
I'm going
around.
to try that next time. That's really good advice.
Thank you, Emily.
Time for one more? Yes? Okay, right here. Me? In the white, yes.
My thing is that sometimes I'll have like a idea or like a fully fleshed out like world in my head, but sometimes I don't know how to get it to a story or on paper. So I don't know if you guys ever have that issue, but I'm just wondering how you get your idea and your concept and create a story out of it. And also, I want to say I'm a big fan of Silvia.
Hi. Thank you.
I think having an intermediary step is really helpful. One thing I do a lot is journal, and I'll just kind of talk through the ideas to myself, and getting the act of getting them on paper helps concretize things, helps see where you're going, and then a lot of times that's how I end up with a roadmap for what I'm actually going to write.
I don't know if anybody has ever done a thesis. Has anybody ever had to do a thesis? Okay. Your advisor probably told you that your thesis statement the first time around was too broad, right? You wanted to explain happiness or something like that. And so you had to get really, really narrow, and you end up writing about, the wings of blue morpho butterflies in a patch of the Amazon in the period from 1920 to 1950, and it becomes narrower. And I mean, the reason why your thesis advisor does that is because you cannot tackle something as broad as happiness, define happiness. St. Augustine wouldn't have been able to do it, and he tried, and you are not going to be able to do it. So you have to look at it in a narrower kind of way, narrow your scope. You may have an idea about an entire empire that spans 100 years. That's probably not going to be realistic. So you have to go down to maybe it's one person, maybe it's a nobleman, or it's not a nobleman. It's the stable girl who takes care of the horses, and what does she see of this empire? Who does she interact with? So start, like a thesis advisor. It's too broad a statement. Go down and down and down and narrow it as much as you can. Because it's that same thing, like where I tell you otherwise, it's like my friend who 7 years after is like, I don't know, I've got 7 continents and the seasons and a new language, and I'm like, Jesus Christ, it's worse than Tolkien. But even Tolkien got to that point where if you read The Hobbit, it's like a bunch of hobbits going on a little adventure. It's not like the whole Silmarillion, I can never say it, which is a whole other thing, right? It's so you need to have a little Hobbit adventure, not the other one. But what Tolkien really wanted to do was to invent languages. That's really nice if that's what you want to do. But if you want to do a Hobbit, go for the little Hobbit experience, not the whole become a linguist and invent your own language situation.
I think a Hobbit adventure is a great place to end. Thank you all for coming, and thank you for our lovely panelists.